Towards the conclusion of Jordan Peele's most recent horror flick, Nope, O.J. Haywood, one of the film's primary protagonists, comes face to face with what can only be described as a monster. After watching it for days, studying its movements, and watching it devour human beings whole, O.J. is now face to face with the alien's true form, in all its terrifying yet majestic glory, all while the shy and despondent O.J. faces his fears and looks the beast right in its eye. Eyes? I don't know, it's kinda got a be not afraid vibe with its look, if you catch my drift. For as long as we've been drawing lines in between them, humans have always wondered about what goes on beyond the stars. The extraterrestrial frontier, as it were. There are some worried about whether or not we could colonize it effectively or not, but we still to this day think about what would happen if they were to come to us first. What would they look like? What type of music would they like? Would they actually want to eat us in the first place? Would they leave after realizing that we have a giant hole in our ozone layer and it's just a ticking time bomb on this planet? Aliens permeate our imaginations much more potently as the rapid advancement of technology inches us closer and closer to a world filled with AI technologies that control our every move. Virtual realities and virtual monopoly money can be bought with real money at the same time. Hell, if we're a single button away from nuclear disaster, then who's to say that a flying saucer can't come out the sky, right? Speaking of which, the minute I saw that alien and its true form and all that, Neon Genesis Evangelion vibes, I just knew. Which, let me say now, is nowhere near a bad thing. Wearing your influence on your sleeve can be a good thing to tell new stories if you don't bite off more than you can chew, you know? But I think there's a lot more to this connection than just fighting giant monsters. A lot more concerning the connection that we all have with each other and how that gets severed along with our relationship with everyday life due to the overall despair that we feel from all the catastrophic events we seem to be facing.
Ah! Whoa. Look at me, man. Don't do that. Don't yell.
I gotta give a little bit of context as to what we're even talking about here. So beyond the obvious of an alien in Nope and angels in Ava, there are a lot more similarities between the characters as well too. For instance, OJ and Shinji. Both of them are dejected introverts suddenly thrust into a role with the added strain of maintaining expectations. I'd even go further and make a comparison between them and one of the other pilots, Asuka. Both of them are spunky, badass girls who command attention in every room that they enter. The comparisons really shine in how those characters choose to engage with hardships while walking around with a pit in their stomach. That feeling that nobody really thinks they're living the life that they should be. The biggest thing that comes to mind when we talk about Nope is of course spectacle and the damaging effects that come from participating in it, even if you're looking at it from an outside looking in point of view. I mean, for God's sake, the movie starts off with a Bible verse. Very ominous Bible verse, if I've ever heard one. Whether we're the ones facilitating it or consuming it, our desire to gander at sights that disgust and horrify us just seem to keep coming up when bad things happen. The commitment to that which causes gripping despair. The fear of the unknown is a powerful tool that can be used for everything from paralyzing to propagandizing. Even when the main characters are looking at an indescribable, unmovable force, it's not really a definitive group of words that you can use to describe, well, a pit in your stomach. Now, how does all of this deal with spectacle? Like I said, OJ and M, and by extension Angel and Host later on in the film, become wrapped up in the excitement of the discovery of something unbelievable, for lack of a better term, something that should bring them all somewhere different to where they've already been. As the movie goes on, you realize that the Haywood kids kind of grew up encasing themselves in the belief that bad things are just gonna happen no matter what happens, just because bad things are just meant to happen. It doesn't get much better than this, no matter how hard you try. Now, I'm no body language expert, although there seemed to be a large spike in that profession on this platform lately. But you can tell that like all that dejection, all that sorrow just emulates in just how they move in society. Like take OJ for instance. He struggles to make eye contact with anyone because of his inability to overall connect with anybody outside of his reality. He's chosen to operate in finite quantities lest he breaks the shell that he's already encased himself in. Host is a character that has a pretty cool arc too, with his position as the world-renowned filmographer clearly in an identity crisis. Despite all the acclaim and all the accolades, Host doesn't have a definitive piece of work that he can call his own. It's only after the promise of the Oprah shot that he has that spark again, that drive for seeking out something that seems impossible. Even Angel, he's a character that, wants to break free of the monotony of his daily life. And even while he's doubtful of any existence of aliens in the first place, he's still going out there and, trying to make things shake. Between the two of them, I feel like M might edge out OJ in regards to who's the most detached from the farm, family trauma as a whole. Their dad never really gave her the chance to contribute to the family business as much as he did OJ. Thus, she hides a lot more of that insecurity underneath a bright personality. M is way more willing to finesse her way into her dreams and aspirations by using her passion and her drive and desires and goals. These feelings, though, brought on by a separation between the average person and what they create or take part in, inform this reaction to said separation, which can be described as alienation. In Man Alone, Alienation in Modern Society, Eric and Mary Josephson define alienation as an extraordinary variety of psychosocial disorders. Things like anxiety, loneliness, powerlessness, an individual feeling of disassociation from self and the world as a whole, and of course, despair. And who else to feel that way but the marginalized? So you got working class folk, queer folk, women, disabled folk, everyone in between, and everyone who intersects within two or more of those identities. For instance, we have M and OJ, black people who are, a little bit distanced from the fact that they're not really seeing the much fruits of their labor. A little bit of a separation from the means of production. Despite its isolating feeling, alienation, because it occurs at so many different intersecting identities, is usually something that a lot of people deal with at least once in their lives, buried underneath layers and layers and layers of withdrawing factors, of course. For the Haywoods in particular, they're directly in conflict with upholding a legacy that precedes them while also still wanting to make a name for themselves. Speaking of, I really do appreciate Jordan Peele providing his own context to the unnamed horse jockey, captured by Edward Muybridge in the 19th century, which constitutes as the first assembly of photographs to ever create a motion picture. They're Bahamian. Shout out to Bahamas. Shout out to Bahamians. Saying Wagwan. Great-great-great-grandfather in this universe, to this day, still remains nameless, while the name of the white photographer that captured the animal locomotive remains to be at least a trivia answer that you get on Cards Against Humanity or some shit. It's really subtle, but the maintenance of this legacy is indicative of the concept of double consciousness that W.E.B. Du Bois talks about. In all terms and purposes, it relates to the alienating feeling that black folk as a whole feel living amongst their oppressors in the United States of America. Everything from measuring themselves up to their white counterparts to measuring themselves up to each other on their ability to attain status and capital based on their proximity to whiteness.
The truth is that the Negro race has been scattered, that it can no longer claim unity. In the universal situation of the Negro, there is an ambiguity, which is, however, resolved in his concrete existence. Wherever he goes, the Negro remains a Negro.
It's gotta be hard for OJ and them, because you can tell that they're really proud of where they come from and they're happy that they have this history, within their family. But at the same time, they just grow ever more distant from said heritage as they get older. All the while, they're still having to show face for these white folk that really could care less about who they are and what they do. They're still clocking into a job that doesn't pay enough or fulfill them. a job that carries the weight of a legacy that they don't even really see can carry much more ground in today's day and age. In other words,
especially as you go through the identity thing and you're like from 18 to, from all your life, but like definitely like 18 to like 22, I was like, who am I? What does it mean to be black in America? What does it mean to be black in Africa? What is the diaspora?
But the facing of so vast a prejudice could not but bring the inevitable self-questioning, self-disparagement, and lowering of ideals, which ever accompanying repression and breed in an atmosphere of contempt and hate.
From Invasion of the Body Snatchers to the Alien franchise, who else better to showcase the fears of late-stage capitalism than grotesque monsters? But rather than McCarthyism scaring the streets or the fear of technology overtaking humanity, Nope decides to take a little bit different angle. Nope serves as a fresh take in the horror genre, basically with the premise of, what if the alien ship isn't a ship? Immediately, it magnifies the scope of trying to capture some random extraterrestrial. The randomness of said extraterrestrial is way more of the focal point. We don't have a 26 episode anime or a subsequent movie series to break down where it comes from or why it's here. Speaking of which, Neon Genesis Evangelion best emphasizes alienation in its own way with episode 16 entitled The Sickness Unto Death, and then The Splitting of the Breast. In it, an angel known as Lilil appears, causing havoc unlike seen before with any angel that came before it. Nothing that anyone is throwing at it is working, and it leads to Shinji, the main character, being swallowed whole inside the shadow that the angel casts on the ground. While enveloped in the shadow, Lilil takes Shinji on a long, introspective journey through its own dimension, dragging him through his inner child turmoil and overall personality complex he's developed up to this point. So just think Everything Everywhere All at Once, but in one episode. A complex derivative of the alienation that Shinji feels with life, especially now that he's doing something, for one, that's not really that fun, and two, something that isn't even really what he wants to do in the first place. The OG of existentialist thought himself, Soren Kierkegaard, is referenced through the episode's title with his work, The Sickness Unto Death. In it, Kierkegaard delves into the relationship between the self and painful dissociation from one's beginning and end, otherwise known as, let's say it together people, despair. I know y'all have seen those videos that showcase how small the moon is compared to the earth, and earth compared to Jupiter, and Jupiter compared to the Milky Way, and the Milky Way compared to every other galaxy that has ever been existed, and so on and so on and so forth. And you're also probably familiar with the feeling of, oh my god, I'm so insignificant in the grand scheme of everything that's ever existed. I'm just a mere speck on a spinning rock. That's the despair that Kierkegaard was referring to when he describes the concept of self, how we relate to the world around us, externally and internally. Basically, there are many instances where the experiences that we have in the world can be debilitating, and that can cause us to become a recluse, become a homebody, alienated.
The determinist, the fatalist, is in despair, and as one in despair has lost his self because for him, everything has become necessity. The self of the determinist cannot breathe, for it is impossible to breathe necessity exclusively, because that would utterly suffocate a person's self.
There are 3 levels of despair Kierkegaard would attribute to everyone. 1 is being unconscious of oneself, 2 is not wanting to be oneself, and 3 feeling that one is not themselves. Throughout the 3 levels of despair, there's an inherent lack of an accurate conception of self rather than simply emotion. He even says that one can be in despair's first form, being unconscious of self, despite being generally happy. So despite their despair, definitely the not wanting to be oneself kind, these characters are adamant on getting this picture of this alien that's already proven to have at least some responsibility for killing one person, mind you. In Nope's case, the Haywood family business is casting the large shadow of generational baggage on the kids and is alienating them, which leads to their lack of self-determination, leading to the point of using spectacle to escape from beyond what they feel is expected of them, or even worse, what expectations they've placed upon themselves. So okay, now we have our spectacle, at least an avatar that we can match to our own lives. We also know that a common reaction to said spectacle is to remove yourself from anything else going on, focusing solely on what can be provided materially rather than, the reality of everyday life. The movie starts within the aftermath of a rampage on a set of an obscure sitcom from the 90s. Jupe is the only member of the cast not left completely disfigured or harmed by a startled chimp. Flash forward to today, and Jupe is completely enshrined what happened behind a paywall. He's even renting out his ranch to people who want to be surrounded by paraphernalia of the sitcom and said chimp rampage while they go to sleep. A life-changing event like this, one that ends with an animal getting his head blasted right in front of him, somehow ends up as a source of income for Jupe, a way for him to profit. I mean, I don't really hold that against him personally, but it's pretty sad, honestly. He's casually bringing up SNL skits that reference this super traumatic thing that happened to him in his life, and he's just brushing it off like it didn't happen to him specifically. This level of self-alienation is really only possible by the effect of commodity fetishism in action. Resident fuckboy Karl Marx describes commodity fetishism as the blurring of lines between things produced by the working class and in turn consumed by the masses. This relationship between goods and services made in a society becomes depersonalized from the reality of how said goods are made by mystifying them. Think iPhones made in sweatshops or Big Macs made by college students that are getting super underpaid. Word has already gotten out that something weird is going down at this ranch area. We don't know what's going on, but people are gone. And who better to investigate crime scenes without any shred of integrity for the victims of a tragedy than TMZ. We never get to see what the mysterious motorcycle dude looks like, only that he's here to get a scoop way before anyone else can. A cog or part of the well-oiled machine that TMZ runs for the profit of sensationalization. I mean, excuse the fact that a good amount of people were disappeared in an instant, and you really only sent one guy to check things out? He doesn't even really take time to get any more info from the gang, opting to just get his own Oprah shot. Even more removed from the gravity of the situation than Juke or OJ or M was. It isn't until Gene Jack comes out for dinner round 2 that it's too late for anything to be done. TMC guy dies, begging not for his life to be saved or someone to tell his pet that he loves them, but for someone, anyone, to get an image of what's going on here. From there, things aren't that great. Host, utilizing a battery-powered camera, is able to get footage of the alien action, but he too is vacuumed straight up into the sky with the camera. It's like you just deleted a picture thinking that you had it on your iCloud, and then you go to your iCloud and it's not there, and you don't have any way of recovering that picture. It's here our cast is completely underneath the claws of the commodity. French philosopher Guy Debord talks about the encroaching effect spectacle has on people in the society of the spectacle.
Every given commodity fights for itself, cannot acknowledge the others, and attempts to impose itself everywhere, as if it were the only one.
Because of its existence and our constant need to look at it, the spectacle morphs into an item of value or status, despite the sum of its parts that contradict its perceived wonder. Yeah, chips are cool and UFOs are awesome, but how is it so easy to ignore so many red flags that may be warning us of something darker potentially happening? We fetishize all the cool, indescribable parts and pay no mind to the truth that's underneath the surface. And you don't really need to dig that deep to see it. And we do this all the time. With the advent of the internet, it's easier than ever to see some of the most horrendous things completely removed from their original context. The vagueness of media like this can allow us to picture ourselves in scenarios, especially due to the unique perspective of the cell phone camera. Often though, we find ourselves with a glaze over our eyes. Maybe it's a defense mechanism that human beings have developed over the last 20, 30 years to prevent us from being overstimulated by tragedy or large acts of violence. Which brings us to the people that bring that media to us. What I mean to say is the inclusion of TMZ in Note isn't an accident. That day that Kobe Bryant and 11 others were killed in a helicopter accident comes to mind. Before any big news conglomerates were even ready to confirm that a helicopter in California had crashed that day, we already knew who died, who was flying the copter, before family members of people involved in the crash. Vanessa Bryant literally just got out of a lawsuit with police officers who were some of the first responders to the scene. These officers took advantage of their position, being some of the first people in the world to see what happened with their own eyes, and took pictures of the crash site with the intent to share around these images with literally anybody who wanted to see them. As sick as it sounds, we constantly have to deal with the fact that no matter how horrible the circumstances, some people see an opportunity for capital, whether monetary or social. And in this process, the spectacle of what happened is stripped of its natural negativity and is reduced to a headline or a conversation starter at a bar. We justify consumption on the individual level and ironically justify any individual choice made in the current system we're in, which just validates it and doesn't really challenge, the idea of like, what are we doing here? Why are we acting like this is a regular thing that we should be looking at all the time? And, are we really paying attention to the effects that seeing kinds of crazy stuff like this has on our mental health, let alone our physical health? There's enough studies out there about our intake of horrific media as technology progresses over the years. Hell, despite this being fictional, our consumption of a movie like this is for the spectacle of watching a bunch of people remain powerless in the face of an immovable force. It's just something about watching bad shit happen to people, whether they're good or bad. It's the reason why a series of unfortunate events works so well. Those kids don't deserve all the shit that Count Olaf does, but we just can't help but pick up the next book, hoping that someone will just beat his ass one day. Because, at this point, y'all just gotta beat his ass. That's all. Every time I finish the book, I just be like, alienation from our labor and expectations is one thing, but I think alienation from others is one of the most dangerous kinds. Disassociation from our personal perceptions of reality traps us in a sort of brain fog that prevents us from being aware of ourselves. When we're in the fog, it's a lot easier to dismiss the pain y'all feel deep down, despite it leading us into the fog to begin with. It's way easier to be susceptible to conformity when you're escaping from self-hatred into a self-depreciating form of self-idealization. Capitalism especially fosters the notion that freedom is meaningless in the face of calamity. What does the extent of ethical consumption look like at the cost of other people's suffering, so that we feel good and better about ourselves that suffering is not directly happening to us? Okay. Let's see, there's gotta be something that we could pull from here. Let's just remain positive and just go with the headcanon that OJ survived. And he survived not by anything, but staring the beast directly in its face. Naturally, the cure for alienation are actions that give power back to those people who were alienated in the first place. OJ being able to look the spectacle in its let's just say for what it truly is. Now, of course, it's a whole lot easier said than done for oppressed folk. Shit, some days it's harder to look at myself in the mirror, let alone look at all the issues that are alienating me and disassociating me from reality every single day. Some days it's just way easier to float around like a plastic bag in the wind instead of feeling like our authentic selves. Optimism doesn't really require much to sound corny and cringy, huh? It's at least ironic that this terrifying monster that seemed indestructible from the first scene that it's in is quite easily scared off by somebody just willing to look at it on equal ground. Not removed from spectacle, but at least not afraid of it. Looking at it like, I know what you are, and I'm scared as fuck right now, but I'm staying 10 toes down. Which still just sounds like a pretty small fix to something that, is pretty monumental. I guess when you really think about it, a lot of the things that alienate us today don't really necessarily need super complex resolutions. Things like being open and honest with yourself and going into low-risk environments where you're still forced to come out your shell a little bit. These are all basic tenets to just existing in a world that just gets harder and harder to live in as days goes by. And of course, this is all without the context of a job that you hate or a life that you feel isn't really worth living. The complexity is within the application in itself. And we already know how broad alienation is for everybody. Because let's face it, it's a little bit harder than, what it seems like to just find a new hobby that brings you joy. And that's without thinking about the voice in the back of your head that's telling you to monetize it and make sure that you gain some sort of meaning in what you're actually doing, because you can't find any meaning in what you're doing unless it's making you money or bringing you further in a career so that you can make more money. Clearly, it's a lot of work for everybody. And, we all want to be like OJ and ride off into the sunset, but it's really in that work that the real change occurs. Luckily, he doesn't have to do it alone. A way more broad solution to the ills of spectacle and alienation are just being a part of a community, especially one that can relate to your struggles. But rather than an echo chamber, a group of like-minded individuals who can challenge your perspective in ways to make you a better person. I mean, imagine if Jude had these types of conversations and questions after what happened to him. His whole life would be probably completely different. So yeah, it's less about always loving what you gotta do, but making a better effort to embrace our fuller selves and everything that we do. With that, I think this one quote from Marx kind of sums up everything that we're talking about here.
Surround yourself with people who make you happy, people who make you laugh, who help you when you're in need, people who genuinely care. They are the ones worth keeping in life. Everyone else is just passing through.
Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. If you're watching this right now, you're a dope person, and I appreciate you for that. Make sure you like, subscribe. Really appreciate y'all for giving me a lot of feedback on my last video. That blew up way more than I could have ever expected, and I really appreciate that once again. Make sure y'all check out the Patreon that's in the link in the bio as well too. I got a couple tiers there right now, and not much as far as content, but I mean, the more people that are there, the more I'm actually incentivized to actually put stuff on there that's a little bit more exclusive for, the real ones, the day ones to check out, Great rest of your day, evening, night, week, month, life, whatever. Make sure you drink some water. Peace.